All right, we're here with Phil Eklund, Manker, and Madeleine Fjäll talking about BIOS Mesofauna. So, Phil, if you could give us a brief overview of what BIOS Mesofauna is.
BIOS Mesofauna is the Mesozoic world of bugs. So normally the Mesozoic concentrates on dinosaurs, such as the companion game BIOS Megafauna. But this, just as significant in the history of life, is the invasion of land by arthropods, things like bugs and scorpions and terrestrial trilobites. And so this is a battle of evolution and change in the Mesozoic world. And Mesozoic, and the Meso and Mesozoic means middle, between the Paleozoic and before the Cenozoic. And so Mesofauna means in between life, bigger than microscopic life, but smaller than Megafauna.
All right, so this game, it's a game in the BIOS series.
Yes.
It is between the BIOS Genesis and BIOS Origins, alongside BIOS Megafauna.
Yes.
And it specifically, we're concentrating on arthropods in this game.
Yes.
Who are size 1, if you're familiar with Megafauna. Everything in this game is
less
size
than
1.
2 kilos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and as you said, they're Mesofauna, meaning they're in the middle, in between the microscopic life of BIOS Genesis and the big animals of Megafauna. They're the size 1 animals. So
I wanted to say, just like BIOS Megafauna, it starts with where BIOS Genesis left off with macroscopic life, and it ends again just where Megafauna ends up, just before things get conscious and intelligent. But in this, your consciousness and intelligence will be hive life, and instead of language, you've got things like pheromones, and so it's a different kind of intelligence.
All right, and we'll definitely discuss more about pheromones and being eusocial as we go over the game a little more. So this game is a standalone game in the BIOS series. You can play it as its own game, but it also can combine with Megafauna to make one combined game where you have the arthropods living with the Megafauna, and you have the parasites, and you have the flowers, and that game can be combined into one game. Can you describe more about how that works?
Okay, I can. It's that the laws for competition, for contests and the like, are very similar to Megafauna, and it's scaled to Megafauna, so you can combine the two games pretty seamlessly. To make it interesting, though, if you do a combined game, you import the bugs into the Megafauna world so that you have things skittering around, trying not to get stepped on by brontosaurs. It does bring some new elements which would be interesting in the world of dinosaurs. One of them, as you already mentioned, is flowers. We went through the angiosperm revolution. And so flowers are depicted in this game basically as an insect invention. And so insects have the capacity to spread flowers, with consequences to competition in the small world, but also to Megafauna as well. And a second thing that would be interesting to import into the Megafauna world from the Mesofauna world are parasites. And of course, parasites are very common in the Mesofauna world. All sorts of creatures, arthropods, parasitize other arthropods. But obviously, we all know from experience with things like mosquitoes and leeches and tapeworms and the like, that there's a lot of parasitization of megafauna by these little irritating things as well. And this has consequences in competition and the like. So you can have dinosaurs, and you can have dinosaurs that are afflicted by flies and other bloodsuckers.
All right, so going into that, I think people are curious about what is different about Mesofauna compared to Megafauna. If I have Megafauna, why would I want Mesofauna? One of them is, as you mentioned, you can make a combined game and add elements in Mesofauna to Megafauna. But to describe more of the differences, I can go into the actual mod here. And this tabletop simulator module is available now if you wanted to try it. It's just search for BIOS Mesofauna. So the two major differences are flowers, which are here, and parasites, which are here. So the flowers are interesting in that they actually essentially change the competition, or how competitions work in a hex. So if you have, for example, this insect right here that has a lot of that has 2 yellow cubes, this insect is going to do better in contests where there are flowers than in other hexes which are green. So if you have green cubes, then the hexes that don't have flowers, you're going to compete better in. And if you have yellow cubes, the hexes that do have flowers, you're going to compete better in. And you add flowers by either going into that hex and having no one in that hex already, or if you compete in an herbivore contest and you win that contest, you can put down a flower. You can essentially flower up the joint. Would that be correct, Phil?
Yes, that's correct. We call these pollination wars.
Yes.
Who's the best pollinator? Yellow is metabolism, and so flowers are essentially recruiting the insects for their pollination services, flying around, buzzing around. And so if you've got high metabolism, you're a better pollinator, and you're going to win the pollination wars.
And this is something that this is symbiosis simulated here. So that you're actually, as a pollinator, you can spread the flowers. So the flowers are created by you if you go there as the first species going there, or if you win an herbivore contest on that hex, you can take away or plant flowers based on what you want, which is kind of what the bug you're going there wants.
All right, so
I'd sort of like to mention another difference between the two games and sort of introduce Madeleine at the same time.
Okay.
One difference is that there's a heavier emphasis than in Megafauna on making a picture of the bug. This is part of making the bug more extinction proof, and essentially every promotion will be adding to your portrait. It looks like, Andy, you've made some sort of flying, pretty good pollinator lobster bug here, and maybe Madeleine wants to talk a little bit about the portrait making concepts in this.
Yeah, so Madeleine, one thing to note, as Phil noted, was the fact that unlike Megafauna, which has essentially you're putting the whole width of the card out, and then you have these big, long, wormy looking things. In this game, you actually have a splay. So you have this, and then this is a card, and you have something underneath here to kind of show. So you put that there, you put this here, and then you put this underneath like so, right? And now, and then you have this, which is the species card. So it looks, as Phil said, more like an actual bug. So if you can, now I've gone and let me put this underneath, and then put that There we go.
Tabletop Simulator is a little bit touchy about these splays.
But so can you discuss more as to, you know, what your inspiration was there and how you came up with the concept of display?
Okay, so when I saw the Megafauna cards, I didn't really like that they were all wormy stuff, and I really couldn't really see in my head like what they were supposed to look like. And also, I really wanted when I played the game, I really wanted to make like a bug with a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, to like have a complete bug. So that's why I wanted to display it. So it would be, because bugs are small, so I thought it would be easier to actually get the parts in the smaller area and actually make it look like a bug.
Yeah.
Right. And we can add more thorax cards. She's got it so you can add more thorax cards if you want to make longer bugs, like a centipede or a millipede or a myriapod. But the basic bug, which gives you game advantages, is the head and the thorax and the abdomen, like we see in this particular portrait.
And
this is also a head from a player. It's a player's archetype head, but there's also normal heads on display.
yeah,
cards.
if you're creating an archetype bub, you would use the archetype head. If you're promoting and then creating a new type of species, then you would use the head. Like we can probably go over here and find, yeah, so this right here would be, if you're creating a new bug, that would be like a new head right there. So you have this turned over, and you know,
there's no art there yet.
yeah, but so it would essentially be a separate species. Yeah. But
so when you buy this from the market, that the other side is what you see first.
Yes, so these would actually be turned over.
Buy it from the market, and then another action to upgrade it.
Yeah.
And then in that upgrade action, if it has a separate silhouette figure, you can separate it into a new species, and then
yeah. So if you have something, yeah, right. If you have something like this, much like in Megafauna, and it has like a white species icon there, that shows that can be you can create a new species from that when you promote it, and that would be, you would start here with an abdomen, and then you would kind of work in the other direction with that. So one thing that I wanted to discuss real quick, number one, I think it's really interesting that the cards worked slightly differently. It makes, as Madeleine said, it makes so that the bugs are going to be smaller, which makes sense because, you know, the insects were smaller than the Megafauna. But also, Madeleine, you came up with this system right here for the pheromones. So these, if you go into here, these pheromones are like the emotions in Megafauna. And you came up with this new system right here where you can easily tell which card is, without having to really flip it over, which card is a head and which card is what part is a head, what part is the abdomen, and what the pheromone is and what direction it's facing. You want to talk a little more about what the problem you were trying to solve there was and how you decided to solve it?
Okay, so with the old pheromone system, I was always confused if it was a head or an abdomen or a thorax, and it was mostly the thoraxes because it had two pheromones, but it showed the backwards pheromone like first, and then the pheromone that you were attached the head to second, and I was switching them up, and I thought that was very troublesome for me. Maybe it's easy for others to understand, but I had a very hard time understanding when I
think
made it.
I also had a hard time, so I think this is an excellent solution.
So that's why I came up with it's a bug, so maybe I just have like a bug kind of shape, and since it's like 3 parts, you can show the pheromones in the different parts of the bug on the front.
Yeah, so you have here that there's a head on one side, there's a tail on the other, and this is a yellow pheromone that is the one side, the left side, and then you have the green pheromone, which is the other side. So when you turn it over, you know that, you know, that's the case. There's a head on this side, tail on that side, and this is going to go on, you know, the right side, and this is going to go on the left side. And we have that pretty much listed here. So if you, it's a lot easier to parse what you need and what you're looking for when you're looking at the market. So if we were to go to the market, you can kind of just see, let's go over here real quick. You can kind of see really easily, like, well, I need a yellow tail. Well, I know that, that's a yellow tail and that's a yellow tail. I need a thorax that has a yellow on the left side. Well, I know that that has it, and that's, the only one that does. So it actually, I really like the way that you can parse this information very quickly.
You should mention, Andy, that the top of the card is a preview for the promoted side.
Yes. So when you promote, yeah. So this would be, I know that if I want to add a tail to my insect that's yellow that has a yellow on the right side, I know that I need to buy this and then promote it, and that's going to have the tail that I need with a right side yellow pheromone on there. So I think that definitely increases the parsability of the game. So going a little further back, because we discussed flowers, we haven't really discussed the other major change in this game, which is which is parasites. So the parasites are these guys over here, and the parasites essentially work as I find it interesting because it's essentially like you're investing in a form of life, right? So if you have the symbol, so if we go back over here, the parasite is a new form, and you can see that there's this card right here would create a parasite.
A new species, we call it.
Yeah, new species. So if you were to create, if you were to grab this, and then you were to promote it, and you wanted to create a parasite as a new species, then you would essentially take your parasite folks right here, and you would choose a color, a player to parasite, and then that parasite would be married essentially to that player until that the host essentially becomes extinct. If you can describe a little more, Phil, as to how that works, how you came up with that, the mechanics behind it.
All right. The chief problem in trying to design a parasite is not to make it too debilitating and yet somewhat irritating. The situation is that a parasitized creature is not as fit as an unparasitized one, so they're going to have a disadvantage in contests. But if they've got too big of a disadvantage, then no one's going to want to become a parasite, because in a heavily, especially in the second half of the game, there's 2 eras in the game. In the second half, it's intensely competitive. And just having a slight disadvantage, such as suffering a parasite, could eliminate you. This, of course, is bad for you, the victim of the parasite, but it's also bad for the parasite and makes parasitism as a trophic level way of life less attractive. So we've got rules whereby, for instance, if a creeple is parasitized as an herbivore, then a carnivore can prey upon it, even if the body shapes don't match. If you remember a rule from Megafauna, and you've got a flying creature, in order for a carnivore to actually be able to eat a flying herbivore, the carnivore has to fly as well. And so this is a pretty hard and fast rule. So if you evolve wings, then suddenly you don't have any carnivores anymore. But if you've got a parasite, then anything can eat you. and this makes you somewhat less fit, even in herbivore contests where there's a carnivore present. Usually the one that's inedible to the carnivore will win, and the one that's edible to the carnivore will lose. And so this makes a parasite, having a parasite a disadvantage, especially in the end game for survival.
So an interesting going a little more into the mechanics. An interesting kind of player situation that you put yourself in is, well, I want to promote a parasite, and I want to choose who I parasite. You're essentially what I really think is interesting about this is that your fate is more in another player's hands, which you don't really have so much in Megafauna. You're really kind of, it's very unilateral. I mean, yeah, you're feeding on other people in that game, but in this game you can kind of decide, okay, well, I think that your species will be successful, so I'm going to parasite your people, and then you're pretty much limited to that. You can't parasite more than one color. So if you're doing things to kind of benefit another player's species. So for example, if you may add a flower in a hex or not add a flower in a hex if you feel like that would help that species continue to survive, which I think is a really interesting dynamic in the game. Do you feel like that? Can you talk more about how that would work in a combined game as well? How parasites would transfer over to Megafauna?
Yes, the same sort of rules for parasites will be whether or not the parasite is a parasite on a bug or parasite on a mammoth or something.
Yeah.
So if you've got a lot of armor, like a giant tortoise or something else like that, with a parasite, you don't need armor-piercing equipment to eat this tortoise.
So when it feels as equipment, that's a concept from Megafauna, where you have tools which you can acquire if you have the emotion curiosity. But in this game, we don't have tools because you don't have emotions, and so but the thing which is important into the parasite mechanics is kind of replacing tools. But if you combine the game, you have both present.
So
when you combine the game, I should also say that about combining the games. If you combine the games, you use the Megafauna game board, hexes, and the track.
The rules, the reservoir, things like this. Because at least for the Octobon, you could use the. If you're playing Tooth and Claw with Megafauna, you could use the Mesofauna hexes.
And we'll definitely talk about the tiles and how all of that works. I wanna discuss just one more thing about the parasites.
Yeah.
So in Megafauna and in Mesofauna, you have herbivore contests and you have carnivore contests. And carnivore, you could, for example, you can go into here, but then you would have to be a carnivore because there's already a dominant herbivore. And you could, I mean, if you, these are, I shouldn't move these too much, but let me take this and let me lock it.
Looks like you're going to have to move that green bug.
Yeah.
Yeah, those parasites are as irritating as the real thing.
Yeah. But let me put this here, and then we put that there, and then we lock this. And we put that there, and then this is gonna go here like so. We can do that and that. And there. All right, so as we mentioned before, this flyer can eat this. If this flyer wants to go in here, they can either try to have an herbivore contest, and in this case, if they have more green, they would win. But if they don't feel like they could win this herbivore contest, they can try to become a carnivore. And unlike in Megafauna, you don't have to be the same shape. You don't have to have the same adaptability because this species is parasited, so you can eat it regardless. So you have your
But if it hadn't the parasite, it wouldn't be able to
correct.
eat it.
So you have the herbivore contest, you have the carnivore contest, and then you have parasite contests. So if you had, let's say that these black insects went extinct for whatever reason, well, now these parasites need to figure out a way to survive, so they can try to go into here, and there would be a new kind of contest, which would be a parasite contest, and that is determined not by yellow or red or green cubes. It's determined by blue cubes. Can you describe more as to, what's going on there with the parasite contest?
Me, yes, sure, I can. In the parasite world, because it depends on its host for all sorts of metabolic functions, all it really needs is its reproductive functions. It needs to reproduce like crazy. And so
blue in this game, the blue cubes represent reproductive.
Right.
Talents.
The red are senses, like good seeing and hearing. Parasites don't care that much about senses, so those are reduced. Yellow is metabolism or your circulatory system. The parasites don't. The parasites don't really care about that either. That's all provided by their host, and even the digestive system. The parasites, are living in food, basically.
And when you say digestive system, that's the green cubes.
Yes, the green cubes, that's right.
All right.
All they really care about is reproductive spreading and making more copies of themselves. And this is all determined by the number of blue organs or blue cubes. And so in a parasite contest, if you move one parasite to another, you see who's got the most.
All right, so one thing, so that is the new kind of contest that we have. The next thing that we can discuss are these new tiles. So we don't have the cratons that we have in Megafauna. We have these 3 hex tiles.
Yeah.
And can we discuss a little, Madeleine? I guess we can start with the art. What was your kind of process in creating, these the new hex art?
I don't know if I actually have a.
Because this isn't. We should note that none of this is final art, but you had some ideas as to how you wanted the hexes to look, perhaps like combining, or maybe you can talk more about that.
Yeah. So the thing is, Madeleine has done the prototype art here, but hasn't been. But there not that much in the hexes yet, because we are still fiddling around with the mechanics. So, but in short. When you start the game, each player gets 2 random triplets, hex triplets, and you get to choose, as the rule stands now, you get to choose which side of this double-sided thing you want to place. And in player order, you place one, and then the second player plays another, and so on, until you place. This is a 2-player game because there are 4 triplets here. If there was a 4-player game, there would be 8 triplets. And when you place them, and that means the shape can be very different from time to time, but you have to place them so that at least 2 hexes is connected to an existing tile, and you have to place them all as a big continent. So it's a big. You don't start in the various sets of islands. And then the second part of this is that in the events of the game, there are breakup events, and it's a bit hard to see here, but if you zoom in, you can see that they have numbers on them on one side, which will tell you which of these will be affected. So if there is a number 2, for example,
on the east coast of the southernmost craton,
you have number 2, and if there is a number 2 on the event card, this will break apart from the big one. And
Right, it's a fault line. The white numbers are faults, and they're all numbered 1 through 8.
Yeah, and if there's already been broken apart, it will crash into the system again, and it does so. The breaking apart and the crashing in is determined by the mountain ranges. So they are black triangles. So if it breaks apart, it brings along anything that's adjacent to a mountain side of a hex. And if it crashes in, it will crash where it creates the longest mountain total range. So
To say that another way, continents, which is a grouping of cratons, a continent is defined by the mountains. So when these things move around, they move in such a way that the affected craton, the one affected by the event, will carry the mountains it has with it. And all the black triangles, if they're adjacent to another craton, are considered mountain ranges. And these will help act as barriers to movement in the game if they're adjacent, and have other consequences, for instance, during ice ages and the like. So where the end result is sort of an interesting recombination and splitting apart of cratons. Now, this is on a hex map, but the game as delivered won't have a hex map, so they'll just be either separated or joined together.
Yeah, so
the distance is not very important.
Yeah,
the distances are not important, or which direction it drifts are not important.
No.
So to give a very brief example of how this works, as mentioned, the game will actually only come with the trip hexes, and unlike Megafauna, there are no latitudes. So it doesn't matter. You're not necessarily moving something north or south, east or west. You're just breaking apart or going back together. So in this case, if we had an event and the event had a 2 on it, we would need to move this 2 continent, and this 2 continent would essentially just. I'm gonna actually do it because we would have to reset all things, but essentially you would move this just over, and you can move it anywhere. You can move it over, you can move it over here or over there. This is just to show that this continent needs to move. Now, as Yoon said, because there's a mountain range here, this continent is basically connected to this continent. So you would have to move this whole landmass. Both of these hexes would have to move.
The 2 cratons are linked together to form one continent.
Yes. So these two cratons would basically move as one continent, and now these 2 would be separated from these 2 over here. So if we had, for example, a 7 that pops up in the event, so this 7 is connected both to this craton and this craton. So these 3 cratons are one continent. So what would essentially move is this. These 3 would move, but it would be the equivalent of moving this one over. And now you have 2 continents. You have, the southern continent and the northern continent. And that's how movement essentially works in this game as compared to a Megafauna. So this is a simpler form of movement. There is no one thing to note about Mesofauna is that it's a lot more of a streamlined game. There's a lot of things that are not in this game. Can you talk, Phil, real quick about what was removed from the game and why you felt that would help?
Okay. I'll mention, first of all, something that was sort of added to the game in as much as in the Tooth and Claw, for instance, the bugs have 3 actions instead of 2. So there's more to do in your turn before the next event, because bugs evolve faster than Megafauna, basically. Mm-hmm. So you'll get a lot more species a lot faster. I mean, I think in our last game, I had 7 species out, and I lost 2 of them in the last turn.
I don't think you had 7 because there are 6 in the game.
I said 6. I didn't
Yes.
say 7.
You had 6 bugs out, but 2 died out, was extinct the last 2.
It went extinct in the last very exciting turn.
And when you say tooth and claw, you really mean the standard game of
Yeah.
Mesofauna.
So
yes, I mean the standard. Yeah. This is very, very similar to the tooth and claw in Megafauna, in as much as there's. You mentioned what's removed. In as much as there's no climate, there's no
monsters.
There's no latitudes. There's no climate disk. So there's no forest discs. There's no mountain discs. There's no ice discs. You don't have the reservoirs
And the plankton.
or the plankton or the offshores. Bugs hate the ocean for some reason. So all the action in Mesofauna is on land. Now this
and lakes.
There'll be lakes. That's true. So freshwater or land. So you can, without any trouble, have all the climate and reservoir if you import this game into a Megafauna game. So it's made so that you won't lose anything if you've got a Megafauna game. But this game is much simpler. It comes in a small box and doesn't have a map board. It just has the crayons. Perspective's a little bit strange here, because but it's a traditional square box, more or less, the portable box.
Yeah, it's a smaller box, and it's borrowed from, you can say it's tooth and claw from Megafauna, but evolved in several ways and a little bit added. So I'd say it's the standard game of Mesofauna is a bit more complex than the tooth and claw game of Megafauna. But also there will be something called the quick game, which is an easier variant of Mesofauna, which is thought to be the real stepping stone if you never played the BIOS game before, because then you can play that the quick game of Mesofauna, and it's considerably easier and more focused on just competing over stuff, and surprisingly fun, I have to say.
It is a lot of fun, and the reason we call it the quick game, I wanted to mention, is because the turns go by pretty fast, because you only do one action per turn.
Yeah.
And there's no events in the quick game, so you just go round robin, one action, until somebody, I think...
somebody has choose to end the game if they have a use social animal, which is 3 cards joined together.
Yeah. Why don't you talk a little bit about use social? You always seem to get a use social creature. I don't know how you do it.
I'm social. Are you social? I'm social.
So to recap real quick, and then we can get into that. So there's the standard game, which is going to be 3 actions per turn, and that's more than you have in regular Megafauna, because again, as Phil mentioned, you insects evolve faster, and in that game you have 5 total actions, which are mutate, speciate, populate, neoteny, and what am I? Is it 4? In any case, it's there's
5 of them all together, and mutate, which is taking a card from the display.
And promote. You missed
promote. Yes, that's the one that I missed. So promoting would be grabbing cards from the market. Or sorry, mutate would be grabbing cards from the market. Promoting would be flipping those cards.
Yes.
Populating would be adding
flipping those cards, which automatically, this is a major change.
Yeah.
Which adds it to your portrait of your bug, and you can't promote it unless you can put it as part of your portrait.
Yeah, unless you can
Um,
fit it in here as
You can replace existing ones, though.
You
Yes.
can replace existing ones.
So you could yank away the head there and put the other head, which is laying next to it, if you want.
Yes.
I wanted to make a small comment here. This makes the bugs a little bit less flexible than in Megafauna, but the fact that they have 3 actions per turn gives them more flexibility. So in a combined game, we think it still needs more play testing, that the bugs will be able to hold their own against the dinosaurs. If you've got both Megafauna and Mesofauna in a game, because the bugs are a little bit trickier to construct, but they also have 1 extra action in order to construct it. If we're talking tooth and claw or octobon environment.
Yeah.
All right. So you have mutate, you have populate, or sorry, you have a promote, and then you have populate, where you would add new babies on these adorable insect cards that Madeleine made. Madeleine, these are just the cutest things. You
I
have
didn't
here.
know it was possible to make maggots cute.
Yeah,
But you have these, you have
yeah,
these.
they're cute.
Those are baby parapati, by the way, if that's the plural of parapatus.
Now it is.
Okay.
Melanie, did you want to talk a little about I guess in general, not just the art style of the babies, but the art style that you were going for when you were making, the insects in general?
Sure. For all the mutations, the promoted sites, they're more like a sketchy style. Like, like, I don't know, the inspiration is like sketches of insects and
Kind of like old-timey insects in
yeah,
like books and stuff.
exactly. I was like, I don't know how to tell it. But yeah, and I don't know yet how the unpromoted site will look like, because I haven't tested that yet. But I think it will also look more in the book.
The book style.
Yes,
Kind
in
of
the book
but like
style.
like textbook diagrams essentially.
Yes, and
Um,
then all the yeah,
no,
sorry.
yeah, continue.
But then all the other art, since I'm also going, like, taking a lot of inspiration from Megafauna, and I don't want it to like look as far off from it, which is also why the mutations are more grayscale and stuff. But the insect babies and the species cards and the box arts, etc., will be fully rendered, but more like not 100% photorealistic, but more like painterly.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
I think is I really like the style of kind of the very kind of watercolor type, insects. Like I said, the babies look really cute, but the zombie ant over here, all of these look amazing. But in any case, so the populate action works the same way in that you add your new creeples into here, right? And
Yeah.
then you would move them onto the board during that phase of the game. Then
Yeah.
you would have so you have mutate, promote, populate. You have neoteny. So events still work the same way, and the mutagen events would still work the same way, Phil, where you have certain mutagen events, and if you are over specialized, your animal may become extinct.
Yeah. So you need to take away the basal cubes, which are the ones on the portrait.
On the species
card, you have basal cubes, and you can neoteny, and that action takes away 1 cube from each of your species. And sometimes it's hard to choose because they are nice to have, but it's also risky to have too many.
Yeah. All right. So then we have and that's why you would want to do neoteny actions.
Yes.
And then so those are
Then you have the speciate.
Then you have the speciate, and that's when you would create new species. So if you wanted to create, if you have one of these, one of these cards, and
Yeah.
you see here that it
Special
has,
cards, really.
and you see that it has. You can either make a parasite or a burrower, um, and you know that would be a, you would basically put it down here or so, and then it would get the basal organs of its parent and
Yeah.
create a new species. So those would be the actions in this game. In the basic game, in the quick game, you don't have Neoteny actions because you don't have events. There is no, so the way that as far as I understand it, the way that the Cratons are set up at the start of the game is just that world. And instead of,
Yeah.
and you would just have one action, and it would go one action per player up
Yeah.
until somebody makes a eusocial animal, and a eusocial animal is a complete animal like this.
Yeah.
And at that point,
They have to make a eusocial animal and decide to end the game
Yeah.
at the beginning of their turn.
yeah, so when you have a eusocial animal, you are able to end the game, but you obviously don't want to end the game unless you're winning.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's just, it's kind of like in PAX Renaissance where you have, you know, you turn over a card so that you can have that victory condition that you can say, okay, as my action, I'm going to activate the victory condition.
The heat, it gets more heated when someone has a eusocial animal. Then you can never let that person be in the lead anymore, because then the game is over.
And I should mention that what you're trying for here, like in Megafauna, is a body count. You count all the living creeples of your color on the map, and you also get to add each pheromone, completed pheromone in your portrait. In this case, there's 2 pheromones, yellow and blue.
And that's not the cubes; it's the things that connects.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's these right here. It's
not the
this,
cubes.
this, and that. And so we have these. So another thing that's new in this game is that we have species cards for every particular. I know that these don't match. Well, they might match now. So for every species that you have, you're going to have a species card. So
Yeah.
this would be the burrower species.
Yes.
And when you create a burrow species, you put a species card here, and this is where you would put your basal organs, and this is where you would put your unspent unspent creeples. So you can kind of very easily see here that I have 3 burrowers out on the map, and I have 3 left to be able to spend stuff in the market, right? Because you buy stuff.
If I'm playing against you and you have that, I easily see that you have 5 points. 3 there and 2 pheromones.
Yes. And you also know from that you have 3 to spend for buying mutation cards. So I can only buy from this over here. Now, one more thing in the regular game. So you normally have 3 actions, right? But if you have a eusocial animal, you have an extra action for that animal. Do you want to discuss more about what you were thinking about there?
Andy, that we're trying, and we tried the last time, is that this is an event. We've got little honeycomb things, or even 2 honeycomb on certain event cards. And when these show up, the eusocial animals get perks. But if they don't show up, they don't get the perk.
Okay. But there is still obviously a benefit to having a eusocial animal. You get certain things.
There's another perk with having a eusocial animal, and that's that even if you lose the cubes on it, it remains. So it's much harder to.
Actually, I've changed that, but the idea is very similar.
All right.
So Phil, can you go over real quick exactly?
They are more meteor proof.
Yeah.
Yes. So can you go over a little more about like what a eusocial animal is and what you were trying to convey with that idea?
Okay. Well, eusocialism is there are many social animals in the world, like wolves and people, and they like being together. They're gregarious. But eusocial goes a step beyond. This is where you've got a hive structure, a caste system, where you have workers who never reproduce, but still it's to their benefit to protect the queen, who they're closely related to, who will reproduce. So you have highly specialized castes. A reproductive who does nothing but reproduce, workers that do nothing but work, and drones that are pretty useless for anything. But that's called a eusocial system. It's a very highly hive-oriented, advanced society. And in nature, eusocial animals such as termites, social bees, and wasps, and ants in particular, they're growing in biomass every year. They're increasing at the expense of solitary animals, especially solitary insects. Eusocial animals are sort of the wave of the future, and their biomass challenges that of humanity. And so we're still in a question whether or not in a world that's still changing and continents are still crashing and asteroids are still falling, who has the advantage in this sort of future is still not entirely clear.
All right, so so we've spoken about the quick game, the standard game, the combined game, and there's also going to be a solo game, which is currently being worked on by a junior designer at Ion Games, Robin, who is unfortunately not here with us right now. But can you briefly describe how the solo game would work?
Yes, the solo game is conceived as having automated opponent. We're tentatively calling this opponent the Queen Bee after our boss, who I hope's not listening in. But anyway,
it will probably be called Queen Bee.
Probably be called the Queen Bee. So there'll be icons on the events. There'll be a special band of icons on the events. Just for the solo game that will just control the Queen Bee opponent that you're up against. So they'll be taking cards out of the display in the market, and they'll be spreading like crazy on the map, and they'll be speciating and doing all sorts of stuff, and you'll be trying to perform under these competitive conditions.
Yeah,
it's
this extra challenge over
the extra challenge.
Strong opponent.
So the Queen Bee of Ion that was referred to earlier is our CEO Besime Ujanik. From what you've just said, clearly, Madeleine, what we need to do is create, Besime as a Queen Bee in the game.
And as a bug, you mean?
Yeah, so yeah.
That will land well, and if it doesn't, Phil will take the hit.
Sure. All right, so
yes, we're talking about these useless drones, I guess.
So I guess the last thing to discuss, because we've now spoken about the quick game, the standard game, the combined game with Megafauna, and how it combines from Genesis.
One more thing about the combined game, which we kind of didn't touch upon, and that's it's that you have it might be. I mean, first of all, as Phil said, you can use, if you use the Afterburn or the more advanced thing, you have to use the components from the Megafauna. But you can also use these if you want to import the Megafauna creeples into here, and use tooth and claw on these ones and borrow it more. But we also have an experimental rule, which is not tested fully yet, that you might be able to develop lungs if you are combining these bugs with Megafauna rules, so that the bugs, if they manage to make lungs, they can start to grow, because then you get the size dice as an award to your bug, and then the bug can grow and become bigger and bigger, and eventually, if that flies and we get that to work, you could theoretically become a bug that gains lungs and then becomes the dominant species that you play in Origins, at least in
Yeah,
in
and
where
that's
you
actually that's
them the movie.
Yes.
I think so, a long time ago.
Okay. So the concept here is the only thing really limiting the size of bugs. It's not their exoskeleton at all. Exoskeletons are actually pretty good at getting big. The only thing is they don't have lungs. They don't have the capacity to get enough oxygen to all their cells. They all have diffusion type oxygen systems where which is not so good once you start getting thick, because you'll need
channels.
Yeah, you'll need channels, muscles to pump this thing open and close to be able to get oxygen so that you can get big. So lungs are like a bottleneck for having them sized ants and things.
So yeah, right now, the insects in the game, the arthropods, are size 1, but it could be possible that if you develop lungs, you could get into the sizes of megafauna animals. And I want to talk more. Yeah, and I want to talk now. The thing we haven't discussed is how this game would flow into BIOS Origins. So it would use presumably these same. It would use the Megafauna hexes. Can you describe more about how Mesofauna would combine into Origins?
There's 2 ways it would combine, either tooth and claw or octobon.
Mm-hmm.
If it's tooth and claw,
which is the basic game.
Yeah, like the basic game. Then you probably want to use your Mesofauna hexes and Mesofauna events, just because those are bigger and just have more perks. But you could play Tooth and Claw in the Megafauna game, pretty straightforward as well. But if you want Octobahn, and Octobahn is a German word for roller coaster, and this means that you're trying to survive in a world not just competing with your opponent, but also competing against the geophysical processes that run the world, such as volcanoes and camp events and four-bush solar flares and asteroids hitting. You will have to use the megafauna components and megafauna climate strips and the like, and the megafauna rules, more or less. It uses all the rules except for a small subset of rules from Mesofauna, which are imported, that are good just for the bugs. For instance, they get 3 actions a turn.
And you also have the parasites.
And the parasite, those parasites get imported. The flowers get imported, and the like. And then you try to compete under those terms. And the bugs have to stay small unless they happen to get the lung card, which they can start to grow and see fight tyrannosaurs on eye to eye, so to speak.
But what he also said, what he asked was, how does this flow into BIOS Origins?
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
So if you have it, if you play the Tooth and Claw version and maybe using these tiles, then these are a bit bigger than the hexes in Origins. But then you will use there are separate hexes in Origins, but you can build custom maps. So you can use these hexes in Origins to build a custom map to look like the Tooth and Claw map you ended up with if you use that. If you play the standard Mesofauna or the Tooth and Claw variant of Megafauna. And of course, if you play the Megafauna variant Achterbahn, then you have to use the Megafauna hex or the Megafauna. Yeah, they fit on the back side of the Origins board nicely as well, at least fairly nice.
So yeah, if you to recap, you can play a Tooth and Claw game, which would be the basic game all the way across, and then you would use these hexes. you can play a combined game which uses the Megafauna Cratons, and then those Megafauna Cratons would just move over to BIOS Origins. So there's a lot of there's a lot of combinations. You can, if you don't have, for example, Megafauna, you can just but you do have Origins, and you want to combine Mesofauna to Origins, you can just use the hexes that are in Origins to continue that game. So I want to briefly recap over the basically the possibilities and I guess the how someone would navigate getting into the BIOS series. So would you say that this would be the introductory BIOS game if you're interested in the BIOS series?
Absolutely. You should go with this one and play the quick variant first.
Yeah.
And then you play the standard variant of this one. And then you play, probably, since you now know this game, you probably should play a combination of this one and the Megafauna, if you buy Megafauna. And then you can play the Megafauna Achterbahn as the third station, fourth station of this journey into it. And then I think maybe you could either just transport yourself into Origins if you want to continue that, and then eventually maybe even to High Frontier. But you could also take a step back and see how did this all start, and after having played Megafauna, go to BIOS Genesis and start to play a BIOS trilogy where you play Genesis, your selection of Megafauna variant, Mesofauna, Megafauna, and then Origins.
Yeah, I'll just recap that BIOS, it's a basic trilogy. BIOS Genesis, it covers the origin of life. So you start as prebiotic chemicals, basically, or biotic functions. Then the second trilogy is BIOS Megafauna, but this BIOS Mesofauna is an alternate way of playing the second part of the trilogy. And then the third part is BIOS Origins, how life got conscious, intelligent, philosophical, technological.
Yeah.
So the conceptual speed bump in going from Mesofauna directly into BIOS Origins, BIOS Mesofauna, BIOS Origins, is how does a eusocial creature with advanced communication using a language based on pheromones, how it could start to be able to manipulate things for technology, to build, cars and computers and stuff like this, and how it would develop consciousness and philosophy and free will. Can this really be done with a hive intelligence? These are conceptual speed bumps that will have to be overcome somehow to make it believable.
Okay, so I wanna end by asking Madeleine, who has never you haven't played any of the BIOS games previous to this, correct?
No.
But you've play tested BIOS Mesofauna. Do you feel like this is can you give me more about your experience playing this and what you feel how this essentially, do you feel like this is this game was easy to pick up and what you felt was intuitive going forward?
I haven't played it with the latest rules and changes, so I think it's hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was pretty hard. It was easy to understand the concepts, but I guess it's hard to know. I guess it takes a few times before you're like, oh, I need to do this to win, kind of.
Yeah.
Because I always lost.
And that's that's the hallmark of a Phil Eklund game is the rules may be simple, but there's a lot of depth there that you have to
Or maybe it
pick
was
up.
because I played against Phil, so.
Yeah, and Phil, Phil gets all those green cubes and he just starts beating up on you, and it's not fair. But so as someone that worked on PAX Viking, for example, would you say this is comparable to that game in complexity, easier, harder?
I don't know, actually. I feel like I should play them more to actually
Mm-hmm.
say if they're similar. but as someone who doesn't play a lot of board games, I still feel like both of them are kinda like similar in how easy it is to understand it.
Hmm.
I guess. I don't think I have like a direct
Yeah,
answer.
we haven't, this is still early in the development process, so
Yeah.
we'll come back and see, see how people feel about it over time. But yeah, so I think, does anyone have any more thoughts about that they want to share about, development of this game, or where it's going? Or I think it's a really interesting concept, and something that Ion is doing now, where we're onboarding people onto our games. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we have, like, for example, with High Frontier, we have, the Space Diamond game, and in this game, in PAX Viking, we have, the different difficulty levels for the victory
Yeah.
conditions, and then in this game we have the quick game, which doesn't have a lot of rules, and then you can kind of graduate to the standard game, and then from there you can graduate to Megafauna and the rest of the Bio series, which I really think is helpful to get more people to play these, really amazing thematic games that Phil makes.
Yeah, the quick game looks to be 8 pages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is great. So yeah, I'm excited about, the progress of this, and we will, we'll have more information. We'll have more playthroughs. We'll have Robin to discuss more of the solo game. So stay
Yeah.
tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to say also that I think the quick game of this one is slightly easier than PAX Viking. I think the normal game is comparatively similar. Maybe I would say there are different challenges. In PAX Viking, it's more obvious what you should do and can do, but to actually combine the victory conditions might be a harder hurdle to understand. Than in this one, it's just the most creeples and pheromones wins. So it's a more easy, straightforward thing, but it's more convoluted in a way. But they are similar, I would say, in that regard. We didn't say one thing about the mountains. There are 2 eras in this game, which means there are 10 rounds, and then the game is over.
Yeah.
And the mountains there will be a thing in the events which gives the mountains. It can develop ice age during the second era around the mountains, simulating that mountains grow higher and higher, and they get more chilly over there, and so on. And also, I would like to say that it's already been obvious, but just to point out that Madeleine has done new silhouettes, so there will be new silhouettes in this game, and 6 new silhouettes, because there are 6 species here compared to 5 in Megafauna.
I don't want to take credit of all of them.
All right. She don't want to take credit for all of them, but still.
But we
It's
do
not
have, we do have
'cause I
Daniel.
didn't help with
So
the
we might change them a bit.
Yeah, so we have our parasites, we have our burrowers over here, we have our armored, our flyers, and our swimmers. But
And
they
also
are, they're different creeples, and you can use
Yeah.
these different creeples in the Megafauna game. I guess one thing I do want to discuss is also the colors. So we have here the traditional colors, but I know that Madeleine is working on, so we can kind of go very briefly into here's the color scheme that Madeleine was considering.
I
This is
don't
the
show it yet.
traditional. Yeah, well, we don't know what it is yet, but like it's gonna be a different. I guess we should just discuss that it will be a different color scheme than what we have now.
So if you have different, I mean, these colors, you can have these colors don't collide with the colors in Megafauna, and in theory you could play more players, but I don't think we're gonna support that. But it could be some kind of future expansion that you could play up to 8 players, but that's not what's gonna happen now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you all for discussing about Mesofauna more, and like I said, this is the Kickstarter is October 20th, and it will run until November 9th. and we'll continue to make updates on the development. The tabletop simulator module is available now. The living rules are available now. If you want that information, you can go to the Mesofauna BGG page, and all of the information will be there. And yeah, we look forward to seeing how this progresses. Thank you very much, everyone.
If you want to play that, you can join the Ion Discord.
Yes.
And to Andy, and he arranges playtests regularly.
Yes, you're welcome to join the Ion Discord, which I'll post that information in the Baus Mezzafana forums as well. And if you would like to playtest that or be taught the game, we'd love to playtest it with you, either the standard or the quick game. So we can do that. Just hit me up on the Ion Discord, and we can make that happen. All right.
Yeah, maybe also post it on the YouTube, on the description on this YouTube.
Sure. Yeah. It'll be absolutely posted. All the information will be absolutely posted in the description for this video. So thank you very much, everyone, and
Thank you.
so long.